My son looked me straight in the eyes and said the one thing I never thought I would hear. "Mom, you have been living off me for years." The room fell dead silent. My granddaughter Emily froze, her fork hovering halfway to her mouth. My daughter-in-law Jennifer crossed her arms and stayed silent, which somehow cut even deeper. I just sat there, staring at the dining table inside this house. A house I paid for. A house that was still legally mine. Yet after every single sacrifice I made, my own son looked at me like I was a burden. But Michael had no idea that a single folder hidden in my closet could shatter his entire world. Before we go any further, I want to ask you a quick question. If my story touches you, please subscribe and tell me in the comments, have you ever felt completely unappreciated by someone you gave your whole life to? I also love reading where you are watching from and what time it is. Your own stories mean the absolute world to me. I was not always this frail old woman my son now seems so embarrassed to have around. I used to work 16 hours straight and still walk through the door smiling. Back then, my entire universe revolved around just one person, my son Michael. Looking back now, I think that was where I made my single biggest mistake. Not for loving him, but for making him the center of my universe. My name is Cindy Simmons. For most of my life, I believed sacrifice was just what mothers did. You give, you protect, you endure, hoping that one day they will understand. At least, that is what I told myself. 43 years ago, I married Robert Simmons. He was not rich or flashy, just a maintenance supervisor at a manufacturing plant outside Columbus, Ohio. But he was incredibly kind, the type of man who actually remembered anniversaries. He would bring home flowers for no reason at all. He was the kind of man who always made me feel safe. When Michael was born, Robert held him and cried harder than I did, whispering that he would take care of us both forever. And for years he did. We had a beautiful life, a cozy house, summer vacations, Friday pizza nights, and watching movies wrapped in blankets during snowstorms. The kind of quiet, ordinary life that feels priceless only after it is gone. Then, everything shattered. I still remember the phone call. I was working my morning shift at the market when a stranger's voice asked if I was Robert's wife. The instant he said that, my stomach dropped. I knew something was horribly wrong. Robert had suffered a massive heart attack at work. He never even made it to the hospital. One minute I was a wife, the next a widow. Michael was only 16. I was 42, and the future suddenly looked terrifying. The weeks following the funeral passed in a complete blur. Casseroles were delivered, neighbors offered condolences, and friends made promises. But slowly, everyone went back to their own busy lives. But my grief didn't leave, and the bills didn't stop coming. Raising a teenage boy doesn't get easier just because his father is gone. One night, after Michael fell asleep, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at our bills. I held my breath as I stared at the numbers. Mortgage, utilities, insurance, food. Everything Robert and I had planned felt completely impossible. I wept until sunrise, then wiped my tears and got to work. Mothers don't get the luxury of falling apart, not when their kids still depend on them. I took a night job cleaning offices. My days started at 5 a.m. My first shift ended in the afternoon. I would rush home, cook dinner, check Michael's homework, and then immediately leave again. Some nights, I didn't get back until past midnight. I survived on coffee and pure willpower. My feet burned so badly I could barely stand. I sat in my car crying before clocking in, wondering how I would make it through. But then I'd think of Michael, and my legs would keep moving. He really was a good kid back then. I need you to understand that. Michael wasn't selfish back then. He was just a hurting boy. Late at night, I could hear him quietly sobbing in his room, thinking I was asleep. He would just sit there at the dinner table, staring blankly at his father's empty chair. We were both drowning in grief. We just did it differently. Coming home late from cleaning, I found Michael passed out on the couch under a blanket. The television was still buzzing, and a small, handwritten note sat on the coffee table. He wrote that he knew I worked hard for him, promising to take care of me one day. I still remember reading those words. I wept, not because I wanted payback, but because I felt seen. In that brief moment, I knew my boy finally understood. I saved that note. I still keep it close, wondering what happened to that sweet boy. As the years slipped by, Michael finished school and college. Every milestone required another heavy sacrifice. I sold my precious wedding jewelry, canceled vacations, froze retirement savings, and went without basic necessities. Every single cent went to secure Michael's future. And I never regretted it for a second. People always ask why I worked myself to the bone, never spent a dime on myself, and always looked exhausted. The answer was simple. I loved my son. I wanted him to have the opportunities Robert and I never got. When Michael got into college, I wept harder than I did at his graduation. It felt like all my years of struggling finally meant something. Watching him walk across campus on orientation day, I felt so much pride. Proud of him, proud of Robert, proud of myself. I thought the worst of it was behind us, clueless that life was quietly preparing another test. A test far more painful than poverty. Because losing money hurts, but losing respect hurts way more. There was one thing Michael never knew, something I never told him. After Robert passed, I made a major financial decision completely on my own. A choice that would eventually change everything. Back then, I truly believed I was protecting him. I thought I was securing his future, helping him build a life without heavy burdens. I kept that secret for years, not because I wanted a pat on the back, not because I wanted praise, but because I wanted my son to succeed without feeling like he owed me. Maybe that was my mistake. Maybe the truth should never stay buried, because secrets always find a way back, especially when people start rewriting the past. And years down the road, the very son who promised to look after me would stare me down and accuse me of living off him. What he never realized was that the foundation of his entire life rested on a sacrifice he did not even know existed. A sacrifice tied to a house whose story was just starting. Michael graduated from Ohio State University on a bright spring afternoon. I still remember sitting in that packed stadium, squeezing a water bottle and a tissue, desperately fighting back tears before it even started. But the second I saw him cross the stage in his cap and gown, I lost that fight. The tears came anyway. Not pretty, quiet tears, but the kind that tear their way out from deep inside your chest. Tears carrying years of exhaustion, sacrifice, and hope. As parents, we rarely get proof that our struggles actually mattered. That day felt like proof. When it ended, Michael threw his arms around me and whispered, "We did it, Mom." Not I did it, but we did it. Back then, those words meant the absolute world to me. A few months later, Michael landed his first real job at a logistics firm in Columbus. Nothing fancy, no big headlines, but it was steady. It paid well, and more than anything, it gave him independence. For the first time since Robert passed away, I let myself imagine a life that was not just about survival. I even started dreaming about retirement. Not right away, just the quiet hope of a small condo, some travel, and finally learning how to live for myself. Then, Michael met Jennifer. At first, I really liked her. She was sharp, confident, driven. She worked in marketing and knew exactly what she wanted out of life. Michael fell hard almost instantly. Within 2 years, they were engaged, and I was absolutely thrilled. I wanted my son to have the kind of marriage Robert and I built. A real partnership, a safe haven, a family. The wedding was gorgeous, small, but so elegant. Michael looked happier than he had in years. Jennifer was radiant. As they exchanged vows, I silently thanked Robert wherever he was, because our boy had finally made it, or so I thought. The first cracks in the picture appeared right after their honeymoon. Michael and Jennifer wanted to buy a home, a beautiful starter house in a quiet suburb right outside Columbus. 3 bedrooms, a big backyard, and great school districts. Absolutely perfect for the family they hoped to build. Only one problem stood in the way. They could not afford it. Housing prices were skyrocketing, and interest rates were brutal. Just the down payment felt out of reach. I still remember the night Michael came over. He looked totally crushed, just like he did after losing a high school football game. "They took another offer," he said. I frowned. What happened? We just did not have enough. For a second, he just stared at the floor before letting out a bitter laugh. "Guess we are renting forever." My heart broke. Not because renting is a bad thing, because it is not, but because I saw his raw disappointment. He had worked so hard, wanting nothing more than to build a real future. That night, after he left, I unlocked a drawer in my bedroom. Inside sat documents I had not touched in years. Old financial records, bank statements, investments, and one specific account. The money Robert had left behind for us. Hardly anyone knew about it. After Robert passed, his life insurance paid out more than expected. Not a fortune, mind you, but enough to give us options. For years, I guarded that money like a hawk. I invested it wisely, added a little whenever I could, and watched it grow. Every time I thought about spending that money on myself, I stopped. To me, it was Robert's final gift to Michael. So, the next morning, I reached out to a real estate agent. 3 months later, I bought the house, but not with Michael, and definitely not with Jennifer. The deed listed just one name, mine, Cindy Simmons. It was never about control or ownership. It was simply about protection. At least, that is how I saw it. I feared that if they owned it directly, money troubles, lawsuits, or future crises might put their home at risk. I wanted to give them stability, a solid foundation, and real security. It was exactly what Robert would have wanted. When I finally showed them the place, Michael stood speechless. Jennifer just stared at me, completely unable to believe her eyes. "You bought it?" Michael asked. I just smiled, telling them to look at this as our fresh start. Tears welled in his eyes. In that instant, I saw the grateful little boy who wrote me that sweet note years ago, promising he would protect me someday. He threw his arms around me, hugging me so tight I could barely breathe, and whispered, "Mom, this is too much." "No," I softly replied. "It is exactly enough." I never let them know how much it actually cost. I never showed them the closing papers, never explained where the funds came from, and absolutely never mentioned whose name was on the deed. Why would I? I trusted them, and everything about this seemed so simple. They would live there, raise their family, and build a beautiful future. I didn't care about getting credit, and I wasn't looking for gratitude. I just wanted their happiness. A year later, Emily was born, and holding my granddaughter for the very first time remains one of the absolute happiest days of my life. She had the tiniest fingers, incredibly bright eyes, and a full head of dark hair. She looked so much like Michael had as an infant that it took my breath away. From that day on, I cherished her, and thankfully, she loved me right back. For several years, life was wonderful, filled with birthday parties, holiday dinners, school plays, and weekend visits. The house became the heart of our family, just as I had dreamed. But small shifts began. Easy to brush off at first, until Jennifer started dropping comments. She wasn't openly rude, not at first. Just passive remarks that left a lingering, unsettling feeling in the room. "Must be nice not having a mortgage," she'd say. Or, "I wish we had extra cash lying around like some people." The words seemed harmless, but her tone felt sharp. I noticed, but I refused to admit what was happening. Michael was changing too, always busy, easily distracted, and pulling away from our family dinners. Often when I tried to speak, it felt like he wasn't even listening. I told myself this was normal. People drift, careers get stressful, and life gets messy. Yet, deep down, a gut feeling told me something was wrong. One Thanksgiving, I came over early to help out while Jennifer was busy in the kitchen. She had no idea I was standing right there as she chatted on the phone. I only heard fragments, but one sentence cut deep. "Honestly, Michael and I built everything ourselves." I froze in place. Built it all themselves? Maybe she didn't mean it the way it came out. Perhaps I was just being overly sensitive. But for the first time in my life, I felt completely invisible. It felt as though years of my sacrifices were quietly being erased, like our history was being rewritten. But I swallowed the pain to keep the peace. I wanted harmony, so I smiled, helped with dinner, played with Emily, and acted like everything was fine. I had no idea Jennifer's bitterness was only the beginning. Because over the following years, their initial gratitude slowly transformed into pure entitlement. And that entitlement would soon morph into something far darker, threatening not just my bond with my son, but every single sacrifice I made for him. When Michael first suggested that I move in with them, I wept. I cried because I genuinely believed it meant I was loved. Looking back today, that realization carries a pain I can barely put into words. Back then, I was 66 years old, still living by myself in the rental I found after selling my old house. I had managed fine on my own. I handled my bills, cooked my own food, did the grocery shopping, and met my dear friend Linda Parker for coffee every Thursday morning. My life wasn't exciting, but it was peaceful. Until one frozen January morning, changed everything. I slipped on the porch steps. Nothing fatal, just a terrible fall. I fractured my wrist and bruised my hip so badly that even walking became painful for weeks. The broken bone wasn't the worst part. The isolating loneliness was. For the very first time in my life, I truly felt old. I remember sitting in my dark living room, desperately trying to open a jar with one working hand. After 10 frustrating minutes, I just broke down. It wasn't about the jar. It was the crushing realization that nobody was there. No one to help, no one to notice, and no one to ask if I was okay. A few days later, Linda dropped by and caught me trying to vacuum with my cast still on. "Cindy, have you completely lost your mind?" she asked. I laughed, then burst into tears, which panicked her. We had been friends for nearly 30 years. She knew me too well to fall for my tough act, and she gently told me, "You shouldn't be alone right now." "I'll be fine," I insisted. "You always say that," she replied. "Because I will be," I muttered. "No," she said softly. "You're only surviving, Cindy, and that is not the same as living." Those words haunted me, and a week later, Michael called. At first, it felt like just another casual check-in. Then my son threw me. "Mom, Jennifer and I have been talking." I should have seen the warning sign. Whenever a married couple starts with, "We've been talking," you know something heavy is coming. "About what?" I asked him. "Maybe you should move in with us." I froze, totally speechless. For a few long seconds, I couldn't even breathe. "You mean temporarily?" "Maybe," his voice softened. "Or maybe permanently." Tears welled up in my eyes, releasing all the heavy emotions I'd been carrying lately. To me, those words felt like a gift, like reassurance, family. "Are you sure?" "Of course," he laughed. "We have plenty of room." The cold irony of that statement would only hit me years later. Because, yes, there was space. After all, it was actually my house. But back then, I wasn't thinking about deed or ownership. I just wanted to belong. A month later, I packed up and moved. Emily was thrilled. That was the one true bright spot from the start. She came running outside the second my car pulled up. "Grandma!" She threw her arms around me before I could even step out. I almost stumbled. "I missed you." "Missed you too, sweetie." She grabbed my hand, pulling me toward the front door. "Come see your room." Your room. Not the guest room, not a spare room. Mine. Kids sometimes understand pure kindness far better than grown-ups ever do. It was beautiful. Fresh paint, pretty curtains, old family photos, and a cozy reading chair. In that moment, I felt truly home. Even Jennifer seemed genuinely welcoming. She helped me unpack, kept checking if I needed anything, and even offered to handle my meds. Those first few months flew by beautifully. Most nights, we shared family dinners. I cheered at Emily's soccer games and helped her with math homework. Jennifer and I even started watching shows together. I really believed all my old worries had been for nothing. Maybe this next chapter of my life would actually be different. Maybe growing old didn't have to mean being lonely. Maybe family could still feel like family. But then the tiny shifts began. Little things that seemed trivial on their own, but slowly built a pattern. It started with the groceries. One night, I saw Jennifer checking receipts at the kitchen counter. She sighed heavily. Food prices are just insane lately. I agreed. They really are. Then she looked right at me. Feeding an extra mouth really adds up. It wasn't flat out mean, but it felt pointed. I immediately offered to pitch in. Let me pay my share. Oh no, she stammered quickly, but then she smiled. Well, only if you insist. I wrote her a check that very afternoon. Problem solved. At least, that's what I thought. Soon it was the electric bill, then water, internet, and even paper towels. Every single talk ended exactly the same way. Another payout, another handwritten check, another quiet reminder that my presence cost them. I didn't mind helping out with the bills. That wasn't the problem. It was how they constantly made me feel guilty for existing. When the power bill spiked, somehow my breathing the air was the explanation. If food prices went up, it was an issue. If an appliance broke, it was somehow my fault. Early on, I told myself I was just being paranoid. Then my friend Linda came over. Almost instantly, she could tell something was off. Lifelong friends always know. She pulled me aside. Are you really happy here? The question stung. Of course I am. She raised an eyebrow, knowing I was lying. I gave a forced laugh. Everything is fine. She wasn't buying it. Cindy, please, I sighed. It's just an adjustment. Is that what we're calling it? I kept quiet because deep down, I didn't believe it either. A few days later, things got even worse. Emily wanted me to come to her school's grandparents' day. She was so excited and had talked of nothing else for weeks. When she brought it up at dinner, I smiled. I'd love to go. Before I could finish, Jennifer cut in. That's on a work day. Emily frowned. Jennifer just shrugged her shoulders. We're too busy. The table fell dead silent. Michael just stared at his plate. Emily's face fell, and sudden guilt washed over me just for being there. The event was 2 weeks away, yet I was already a massive inconvenience. I lay awake that night, tossing and turning. Not because of the school event, but because of what it truly meant. I was slowly feeling less like family and more like an annoying obligation, a heavy, unwanted burden. Months dragged on, filled with passive-aggressive comments, polite, snide remarks, and tiny reminders that I was taking up too much space. One afternoon, I came back from my walk early. Walking toward the kitchen, I heard Jennifer on the phone. She had no idea I was there. I froze the second I heard my name. Something cold in her tone stopped me instantly. Honestly, it's exhausting. A cruel laugh, a quiet pause, and then the words that shattered my world. She's basically a financial drain at this point. My chest tightened. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. A financial drain. Those words kept echoing in my head. I stood there listening, frozen and heartbroken, before Jennifer said something even worse. Eventually, the house will be ours anyway. I felt the blood drain from my face. The house. Ours. Not theirs. Mine. For the first time in years, a feeling I had long suppressed finally surfaced. Fear. Not of losing money or of growing old, but fear that the people I trusted most no longer saw me as family. And what frightened me even more was a single question I could not stop asking myself. Did Michael think the same way? Or was Jennifer only speaking for herself? I desperately wanted to believe it was the latter, but deep down, doubt had already taken root, and soon it would become impossible for me to ignore. After hearing Jennifer call me a financial drain, I spent days trying to convince myself I had misunderstood. Maybe she was just having a bad day. Maybe she had not meant it the way it sounded. Maybe I was just getting overly sensitive. Growing older has a way of making you doubt your own instincts. You start wondering if you are imagining things, if you are overreacting, or just becoming difficult. For almost a month, I talked myself out of what my heart already knew. Then Jennifer stopped hiding it. Not completely, but enough. The changes started out small. A new list appeared on the fridge. Household expenses, groceries, utilities, internet, maintenance, and cleaning supplies. At the bottom was a handwritten note saying everyone should contribute fairly. I stared at it. Everyone. Only 4 of us lived in this house: Michael, Jennifer, Emily, and me. That evening, Jennifer brought it up at dinner. I have been tracking expenses. Michael nodded absent-mindedly, his eyes glued to his phone. Then Jennifer looked at me. I think it is only fair if everyone covers their share. I swallowed hard. I already contribute. You do? She smiled. The costs have gone up. Of course they had. Everything had. But this conversation felt less like financial planning and more like accounting for my very existence. I agreed anyway. What else could I do? I was not trying to cause trouble, so I wrote another check, then another, and another. Weeks later, my friend Linda visited. We sat drinking iced tea on the patio while Emily played nearby. For the first time in weeks, I actually felt relaxed and normal. Then Jennifer stepped outside. Her expression shifted the moment she saw Linda. She was not angry, just deeply annoyed. "How long are you staying?" she asked. Linda blinked. "What?" Jennifer smiled. "I just mean we have a busy day." The awkward silence that followed lasted only seconds, but felt much longer. Once Jennifer went back inside, Linda slowly set down her glass. "She is not very welcoming, is she?" I laughed nervously. "She is just stressed." "Cora." I avoided eye contact. "Cora." I sighed. "Let's not talk about it." Linda looked at me with deep concern. "You're covering for them." "No." "Yeah, you are." I kept quiet because I knew she was right. Later that afternoon, after Linda left, Jennifer cornered me in the kitchen. "I would appreciate more notice before guests come over." Guests. That word hit me like a slap. Linda was not a guest. She was my best friend. She had known me longer than Jennifer had known Michael. Still, I apologized. It was becoming a habit, apologizing for existing, for taking up space, for needing anything at all. Weeks passed. The air inside the house grew heavier. Emily remained the only exception. Without that sweet girl, I do not know how I would have survived. She would sit beside me and share everything. Who got in trouble, who had a crush, her favorite teachers, and what book she was currently reading. Children are honest in ways adults completely forget how to be. One evening, she joined me on the couch. "Grandma?" "Yes, sweetie." "Are you happy here?" Her question startled me. I smiled. "Why do you ask?" She shrugged. "You seem sad sometimes." My heart broke. Even a 12-year-old could see what I was desperately trying to hide. I pulled her close. "I'm okay." She did not look convinced. Neither was I. The real breaking point came one Saturday morning. I woke up early and headed downstairs for coffee. Entering the kitchen, I heard hushed voices. It was Michael and Jennifer talking quietly, completely unaware I was there. I was not trying to eavesdrop, but then I heard my name. She doesn't even realize how much she costs us. Jennifer, Michael sighed. We have talked about this, and it is true. Silence. Then Jennifer continued. We pay for everything, Cora. My stomach tightened. Pay for everything? What exactly were they paying for? I contributed monthly. I bought the groceries. I bought gifts for Emily. I paid my own medical bills. Yet somehow, their story had changed. I stood frozen outside the door. Then Michael spoke, and his words cut deeper than anything Jennifer ever said. Just give it time. That was all. 4 cold words. No defense, no correction, no reminder of everything I had ever done. Nothing. Just give it time. I slipped back upstairs before they could spot me. For the very first time, I wept because of my own son. Not because he was hurting or struggling, but because he chose silence. And sometimes, silence is the ultimate betrayal, especially when someone badmouths the person who spent decades protecting them. That afternoon, I found myself wandering aimlessly through the house I bought, the house whose mortgage I paid off, the place built on years of my own sacrifice. Family photos line the hallway, pictures of Michael graduating, his wedding, Emily's first birthday, Christmas mornings, plays, vacations, so many memories. I stopped in front of one picture. Michael was only 24 years old, the year I bought this house. His arm was around me, both of us smiling. I remembered his exact words that day. I'll never forget what you did for me. I stared at that picture for a long time. Then I whispered something I never thought I would say. You already have. Days later, another incident confirmed my fears. Jennifer assumed I was fast asleep. I was reading in bed when I heard her on the phone downstairs. Her voice drifted up the hallway. At first, I ignored it. Then I heard something that made me freeze. The house will be ours eventually. A pause. Then laughter. Another pause. No, she doesn't have much. I sat straight up, my pulse suddenly racing. No, she doesn't have much. What did Jennifer think she knew? Why did she sound so certain? For years, I had deliberately kept my finances private. Not secretive, just private. I never discussed money. I never bragged about savings or talked about my investments. Yet she spoke as if she had already calculated my worth. That conversation haunted me. More importantly, it left me with a question I couldn't escape. Why was she so obsessed with this house? Not a room, not groceries, not bills. Just the house. Everything always circled back to the house. At first, I shrugged it off as a coincidence. But the thought lingered. What if this wasn't about me? What if I wasn't the problem, but the house was? I had no proof. Not yet. Just a gut feeling. A growing dread, the kind that settles deep in your chest and refuses to leave. One evening, sitting alone in my bedroom, I pulled out an old box of documents. Papers I hadn't touched in years. Among them was a copy of the deed. My name stared back from the paper. Cindy Simmons, sole owner. I gently traced the letters. For some reason, seeing those words brought comfort, reassurance. It was as if some quiet part of me knew I would need them someday. I just didn't realize how fast that day would arrive. The tension under this roof was hitting a breaking point, and soon, one dinner would shatter everything. A single sentence from Michael would crush whatever hope I had left. And once those words were out, there was no turning back. The dinner that ruined everything started like any other. That is what makes these moments so terrifying. You just don't realize your life is about to split into a before and an after. It was a Tuesday evening. Nothing special. Emily was rambling happily about a school project. Michael had just gotten home. Jennifer served dinner while I tried my best to act completely normal. For weeks, I had been carrying this heavy dread. The sharp comments, the whispers, the conversations I was never supposed to hear. This sinking feeling that I had somehow become a stranger in the very home I sacrificed everything to build. But a part of me still hoped. I still believed Michael would eventually remember who he really was. The boy I had raised. The son who once promised he would always protect me. The kid who cried when I worked too much. That night, Emily showed off a school volcano project. "It's going to erupt tomorrow," she announced proudly. I smiled. "I can't wait to see photos." Michael nodded, saying it looked great. Jennifer barely looked up. She seemed totally distracted and tense. I noticed it instantly. Decades of motherhood teach you how to read a room, and she looked like she was preparing for war. Halfway through dinner, she finally spoke. Michael and I were reviewing the bills again. My stomach dropped. Not this again. Michael sighed softly. "Jennifer, no," Michael muttered. But she insisted we talk. Emily stared down at her plate. Even she felt the tension. I stayed silent. Jennifer pulled out her phone, mentioning she had tracked costs for months. As usual, I kept quiet. "Power is up," she noted. "Groceries are up. Medical deliveries, too." She stared at me. Other random expenses. I slowly set down my fork. "What exactly are you trying to say?" Jennifer forced a tight smile. "I'm just saying things are expensive. Everything is." I felt the conversation heading somewhere ugly. Michael still refused to look at me. That hurt far more than any of her words. Because if he disagreed with her, why was he staying silent? I took a deep breath. "I already contribute every month." Jennifer nodded. "Some, but never enough." That was her message. Suddenly the room felt much smaller. Emily stared down at her plate. Michael rubbed his forehead. And Jennifer kept going, saying everyone should carry their weight. There it was, that bitter phrase hanging in the air between us. Everyone should carry their weight. I looked right at her. "Are you suggesting I don't?" Jennifer shrugged. "I didn't say that. But she had. Not with those exact words, but she meant it." Finally, Michael looked up. "Maybe let's not do this tonight," he said. Relief washed over me. I actually thought he was going to stop this. Protect me, stand up for me, actually be my son. But then Jennifer laughed bitterly. "When exactly are we supposed to talk about it?" she asked. Nobody answered, so she snapped, "Someone has to be realistic." The room fell silent. My chest tightened, not with anger, but with a deep, crushing sadness. Suddenly everything became crystal clear. This was no misunderstanding. It wasn't just stress or some passing phase. Jennifer truly believed I was a burden, and Michael was just letting her. I turned to look at him. "Do you agree with her?" The question caught him completely off guard. He hesitated, then looked away. That silence hurt far worse than any insult. "Michael," I whispered, my voice cracking, "do you agree with her?" The heavy silence stretched. 5 seconds. 10. 15. Then Jennifer cut in to answer for him. "He just doesn't want to hurt your feelings." My chest tightened. I knew exactly what was coming. It was that raw instinct, like watching heavy storm clouds roll in while thunder rumbles far away. Something terrible was headed my way, and I was completely powerless to stop it. I kept my eyes locked on my son. "Let him speak for himself," I said. Jennifer leaned back. Michael closed his eyes, then opened them, showing a face I barely even recognized, filled with frustration, resentment, exhaustion, and something else, something much colder. "You want me to be honest?" His question felt like a warning. I nodded anyway. He let out a bitter, joyless laugh. Then he delivered the blow that shattered what was left of my heart. "You've been living off me for years." Complete silence. Total, absolute silence. I couldn't breathe or even process his words. For a second, I wondered if my eyes were playing tricks on me. Living off him? Me? The mother who worked 2 jobs after his father died? The one who paid for his college? The woman who bought the exact house he was sitting in right now? The one who spent decades putting herself last? I stared at him, waiting for him to realize what he'd said, waiting for him to take it back, to show some sign that this was a terrible mistake. But nothing came. Instead, he kept going, saying they pay the bills, support the household, and carry everything. I went completely numb. Every sentence drifted further from reality, as if I had somehow stepped into an alternate universe, a world where history didn't exist, sacrifice was erased, and truth became fiction. Across the table, Emily suddenly burst into tears. "Dad, stop!" Michael froze. Emily's voice shook as she said it wasn't true. Jennifer immediately jumped in. "Emily, no!" My granddaughter stood up, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Grandma isn't a burden," she cried. My heart broke completely. The only person defending me was a 12-year-old child. Not my son. Not another adult. A child. Jennifer ordered her to sit, but Emily refused and ran upstairs, sobbing. Her bedroom door slammed, echoing through the house. Nobody spoke for several long seconds. Finally, Michael stood up. "I didn't mean it like that," he mumbled. But he did, and we both knew it. You don't say things like that by accident. Those words come from deep within, from thoughts you've carried, beliefs you've allowed to grow, and resentment you've chosen to feed. I slowly pushed my chair back. My hands were trembling, not from anger, but from pure, crushing heartbreak. 42 years. 42 years of loving my son. And somehow, this is where we ended up. I looked at him one last time and quietly said, "I see now." Nothing more. No screaming, no drama. Just those 3 words. "I see now." Then I walked upstairs, went into my room, and closed the door. Minutes later, I sat alone on the edge of my bed. The entire house was silent. Too quiet. I slowly looked around my room, this room, inside the house I owned, the home Michael believed belonged to him, and Jennifer believed she'd someday inherit. For the very first time, a hard truth hit me. The truth alone wasn't going to save this family, not by itself. It needed proof. documentation, facts, and real protection. Slowly, I opened my bedside drawer. Right there sat an old, faded business card. David Harper, attorney at law. Robert's dear friend and the man who'd handled our legal affairs for decades. My hand hovered over the card. Then I picked up my phone. It was nearly 10 o'clock. Late, but not too late. David answered on the second ring. "Cindy," he said. Hearing his voice, my eyes filled with tears. "I need your help," I said. His concern was instant. What happened? I looked around the room, at the walls of this house, my house, and finally said the words aloud for the first time in years. "I think my son has forgotten who owns this home." A heavy silence fell before David spoke. "Cindy," his voice suddenly became so serious, "there is something about that house you need to know." His next words changed everything. I barely slept that night. After talking to David Harper, I just sat alone in my room, staring into the dark. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Down the hallway, Michael and Jennifer had already gone to bed. Somewhere upstairs, Emily was likely still awake, crying over that dinner. And I just sat there, replaying my son's words in my head. "You have been living off me for years." Every single time those words echoed in my mind, the pain cut deep again. Not because it was true, but because it was a total lie. I had spent decades sacrificing everything for Michael, yet somehow he convinced himself that he was carrying me. How does that happen? How does gratitude turn into entitlement? How does my own child forget? Around midnight, I finally gave up trying to sleep. Instead, I pulled out an old photo album, one of the few things I had kept through every stage of my life. Inside were photos of Robert, pictures of Michael as a little boy, family vacations, birthdays, and Christmas mornings. Just ordinary moments that seem unimportant until they are all you have left. One photograph made me stop. It showed Robert in front of a small brick building, his arm wrapped around me, both of us smiling. I remembered exactly when it was taken, just a few months before he died. I gently touched the fading picture. "I wish you were here," I whispered. Not because Robert would have fixed things, but because he would have understood. The next morning, I drove to David's office. The building looked exactly the same as it did 20 years ago. He had been Robert's friend long before he was our lawyer. He was at Michael's graduation, our family barbecues, and even Robert's funeral. If anyone knew the truth about my life, it was David. The moment I entered, he stood up, his face softening with concern. "Cindy." And before I could stop myself, I started crying. No dramatic sobs, just quiet, heavy tears. The kind of tears that fall when you have been strong for too long. David handed me some tissues and waited patiently. Once I pulled myself together, he spoke. "I reviewed the property records first thing this morning." I nodded, and he opened a folder, revealing several neatly arranged documents inside. Then he slid the first page toward me. I recognized it instantly. The deed. The original deed. My name was printed clearly right there. Cindy Simmons, sole owner. No other names, no transfers, and no modifications. Absolutely nothing. David tapped the paper. "You own the property." "I know." "No," he said, his voice growing firmer. "I do not think you understand." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He leaned back. Cindy, legally speaking, Michael has no ownership interest whatsoever. Hearing those words brought an unexpected wave of relief. Not because I wanted power over my son, but because I needed to know reality still existed, that facts still mattered, that the truth had not vanished just because people chose to ignore it. David continued. I checked every single filing. He opened another folder. No transfers, no trust amendments, no changes of ownership. Then he looked directly at me. As far as the law is concerned, that house belongs entirely to you. I exhaled slowly. Years of heavy tension seemed to drain from my body, but only briefly, as another question immediately surfaced. Then why did you sound so concerned on the phone? David's expression shifted. He looked troubled, deeply troubled, hesitating before he spoke. I found something unusual. My stomach instantly tightened. What? David pulled another document from the folder. I received a call last month. I blinked. A call from a real estate office. The room suddenly felt ice cold. What kind of call? David folded his hands. They were asking questions about the property. My heart quickened. Questions? What questions? David continued. They wanted to know whether there were any legal restrictions that might affect a potential future sale. I stared at him, completely unable to process what he was saying. Sale? What sale exactly? The silence that followed felt incredibly heavy. Then David said something that made my blood run cold. The caller identified Michael Simmons as the homeowner. I froze. No, that could not be right. Michael would never do something like that, would he? David carefully watched my reaction. You did not authorize anything? No. My voice barely whispered, no. David nodded. I didn't think so. I felt physically ill. Not because Michael had actually sold the house. He had not. He could not. But because he had apparently been exploring the possibility, thinking about it, quietly considering it, and keeping me completely in the dark. David pushed another folder toward me. There is more. I looked up. More? How could there possibly be more? He opened the file. Inside were copies of the original purchase papers. The sight instantly pulled me back nearly 20 years, straight to the day it all began. Back to the day I bought that house. I can still picture walking into the title office entirely alone. The nerves, the excitement, the absolute dread. Back then, Michael and Jennifer had almost abandoned their dream of owning a home. Neither had any idea what I was doing. The funds came from 3 places. First, Robert's life insurance. Second, my hard-earned savings from over the years. And third, the small investments I had carefully built up after he passed away. It was basically everything I had, my entire safety net. I still remember sitting in my car in the parking lot afterward, completely overwhelmed, clutching those keys and crying, not out of fear, but because I was just so happy for my boy, relieved he would finally have stability, safe from the financial terror Robert and I faced when we were barely scraping by. That house was never an investment to me. It was pure love, a foundation, a future. Then David broke the silence, saying, I gave up everything for that place. I laughed softly. That is one way to put it. He gestured to the papers. Cindy, you basically drained your own future to secure his. The weight of those words hit me much harder now than it did then. Back then, I foolishly thought sacrifice earned you gratitude. Now I knew the harsh truth. David quietly closed the file. Then he dropped something unexpected on me, mentioning that Robert once told him something. I looked up at him. David gave me a sad smile, saying it was right before he passed. Hearing Robert's name instantly gripped my heart. What did he say? I asked. David leaned back. He told me, Cindy, your greatest strength is loving others more than yourself. A tear fell. That was so like my Robert. But then David added, and he also said, your greatest weakness is loving others more than yourself. I stared blankly at him. Those words felt entirely different to me now, because for the very first time, I got what he meant. Love without limits simply becomes permission. Permission to take you for granted. Permission to forget. David's voice snapped me back to reality. Cindy, I need you to hear me on this. I nodded. If Michael is trying to sell that house, something is seriously wrong. The sheer gravity in his voice terrified me. How bad is it? David sighed heavily, tapping his desk, saying he did not know. But people do not look into selling a home they do not own without pressure. Pressure. The words spun in my head. Money troubles? Debt? I was not sure, but a terrifying thought suddenly crept into my mind. Maybe this was not about anger. Maybe it was not about me at all. What if Michael desperately needed that money for something else? Leaving David's office that afternoon, I clutched copies of everything. The deed, the buying records, the official proof of ownership. For decades, those documents were just dusty old records sitting in a drawer. Now they felt like a shield. Deep down, I knew a storm was coming, something far worse than a family fight, something beyond just bruised egos. And if David was right, my own son was already plotting behind my back. The only question left was why, and I would find out. After that meeting, I could never look at my son the same way again. It did not mean I stopped loving him. A mother cannot just turn off her heart. I wish it were that simple. No, I still loved Michael fiercely, but the trust was gone. For once, I had to face the reality that my son was keeping dark secrets from me. That realization chilled me to the bone. For almost 20 years, I believed that home meant safety. But now, I had to wonder if it had transformed into something else. A target. I did not confront Michael. David warned me against it. He told me to wait, since I only had suspicions, not solid proof. He was right. So I just waited, and I watched. Sometimes the hardest thing is to stop saving your child. Stop making excuses, and just watch. My chance came sooner than I ever imagined. 3 days after talking to David, I was reading on the back porch when Michael walked out. He was nervous, pacing and checking his phone. He kept glancing toward the road. Then, right at noon, a black SUV rolled into the driveway. A woman stepped out holding a leather folder, sharp, professional, and very confident. Michael rushed out to greet her. My alarms went off. I quietly crept toward the kitchen window, not to spy, but because my gut told me something was terribly wrong. I watched them shake hands, and then Michael began showing her around the yard, the garage, and the house walls. They spent almost 40 minutes taking notes, measuring things, and pointing at the house. My heart started racing. I have seen enough property deals in my life to know exactly what this was. This was no social call. It looked like a home appraisal. Once she drove off, I scrambled back to my patio chair before he saw me. Moments later, he stepped onto the patio, remarking on the beautiful weather. I looked up at him. Who was that? His face shifted, just for a split second, but I caught it. He gave a forced laugh. Just someone from work. A lie. And not even a good one. I just nodded. Years ago, I would have fought back. Now, I kept quiet. Silence often reveals more than a fight. The next week brought another shock. I was helping Emily with homework when Jennifer's phone rang. She slipped into the dining room, leaving the door slightly cracked. At first, I tried to ignore the call. Then I caught a single word. Mortgage. My whole body tensed. Jennifer lowered her voice, but it wasn't enough. No, we are trying to work it out. A pause. Then, if we can tap the equity, everything changes. Equity. The word rang in my ears. Equity on what? The answer was agonizingly clear. The house. My house. A cold chill ran through me. Jennifer kept talking. I know, she said. Another pause. Michael is working on it. Working on what? By the time she hung up, my hands were shaking. Not from fear, but pure confusion. None of this made sense. Why equity? Why meet with people who looked like real estate agents? Why did Michael lie to me? That night, I called David back. He listened quietly as I poured my heart out. Then he asked, Cindy, have you noticed any changes in how they live? I frowned. What do you mean? Major purchases, luxury vacations, new debts, anything out of the ordinary? At first I said no, but then I stopped because suddenly pieces started falling into place. That new SUV Jennifer leased last year, that lavish family trip to Florida, the high-end kitchen remodel, the constant flood of packages, the non-stop spending. David stayed quiet while I processed it. Finally, he spoke. I think you need to consider another possibility. What is that? They might be under serious financial pressure. Those words hit me like a physical blow. Financial pressure. He had said it before, but now it made perfect sense. After we hung up, I sat alone in the dark thinking. The puzzle wasn't complete, but a terrifying picture was starting to form, a heartbreaking one. Over the next few days, I kept my eyes wide open, not spying, just watching. I noticed Michael growing more anxious. His phone never left his hand. He got calls at terrible hours, stepping outside to answer. Other times, he would just drive off without a word. Jennifer seemed even worse off. The tiniest things set her off. A missing receipt, a late delivery, any school expense. Everything was pushing her straight to the brink. Then came the moment that changed everything. It was a Thursday afternoon. I got home early from lunch with Linda. The place seemed completely empty. Michael was supposed to be at his office. Jennifer had Emily at soccer practice, or so I believed. But as I walked in through the garage, I heard voices. It was Michael and Jennifer arguing in the kitchen. I froze instantly, not on purpose, but the pure panic in their voices stopped me. We cannot keep doing this, Jennifer sounded frantic. I know, Michael sighed, totally exhausted. You promised we would have this solved months ago. and I thought I would. Then, complete silence. A few long seconds. Finally, Jennifer spoke again, and this time her voice cracked. What happens if they come after us? My heart started pounding. Come after us? Who? For what? Michael dropped his voice. I could only catch broken fragments, bits and pieces that somehow made the nightmare even worse. Behind on payments, not enough money. Did she say debt? There it was, the very word I had dreaded. That terrible word, debt. A crushing silence followed. Then Jennifer uttered the words that made my stomach drop. The house is our only way out. I felt the color drain from my face. Not savings, not income, not investments. The house. Always the house. Michael did not argue, and that terrified me. He did not say she was wrong. He did not tell her to stop. He just stayed silent. And silence is an answer. Finally, Jennifer spoke again. What about your mother? A long pause. Then Michael sighed. We will handle it. We will handle it. The words sounded less like a solution and more like a warning. I crept away quietly before they could catch me. My legs were shaking, my mind racing. For weeks, I had suspected this. Michael and Jennifer were drowning in serious financial trouble. I did not know the exact numbers or details, but I knew enough. And apparently, they saw this house as their escape route. But the problem was simple. The house was not theirs. That night, I sat alone in my room, studying the papers David gave me. The deed, the purchase documents, the ownership records. Every single page confirmed the absolute truth. Legally, the house belonged to me. Yet somehow, Michael and Jennifer were convinced they could use it, borrow against it, or even sell it. But how? The answer came sooner than I thought. 2 days later, Michael knocked on my door. He had a forced smile. Jennifer stood behind him, looking just as nervous. Instantly, my guard went up. Something was coming. Something planned. Something carefully rehearsed. Michael sat down across from me, and Jennifer took the chair beside him. Then, Michael cleared his throat. Mom, we need your help with something. I already knew this conversation wouldn't end well. For the first time in months, they were both being so unusually kind. And sometimes, kindness arrives right before a trap snaps shut. The moment Michael said those words, I knew exactly what David meant when he told me to be patient. This was it. The talk they had been planning for. The reason Michael and Jennifer were suddenly acting so incredibly polite. The reason they sat in my bedroom looking so anxious. I smiled gently. What do you need? Michael looked at Jennifer. Jennifer looked back at him. That told me everything. Neither wanted to speak first. Finally, Jennifer cleared her throat. It's really nothing complicated. Whenever someone starts a talk that way, it usually means the exact opposite. I kept smiling. Okay, Michael leaned in. We've been talking about the future. There was that phrase again. We've been talking. The words that always preceded trouble. I gave a slow nod. The future is important. Exactly. He looked relieved, almost encouraged. Then Jennifer eagerly jumped in. We were thinking about simplifying things. I almost laughed. Simplifying. Such a sweet, dangerous word. I stayed calm. What things? Michael inhaled deeply. The house. There it was, always the house. Never my health, never family, never my well-being, just the house. I looked down, pretending to consider it. What about it? Jennifer immediately took over the conversation. We've been researching estate planning. Another lie. Not totally false, but not true either. The worst lies always have a little truth mixed in. It would be easier if we organized things ahead of time. I nodded slowly. That makes sense. They both visibly relaxed. They thought I bought their story. They assumed I had no idea where this conversation was really going. That assumption would be their biggest mistake. Michael pulled out some papers from a folder. My heart sank. David was right. They had the documents ready. They'd planned this all along, ready to manipulate, convince, or force me into a corner. Nothing official, Michael said quickly. Just standard paperwork. Just paperwork. It felt insulting, as if I were too old and frail to understand legal forms. Jennifer slid the stack across the bed toward me. Take a look. I adjusted my glasses and slowly turned the pages. Inside, I was furious. Outside, I acted confused. That part wasn't hard. People always assume seniors are confused, so I let them believe it. The documents weren't direct ownership transfers. They were property management permissions and financial authorizations, allowing others to act on my behalf under certain conditions. Alone, they looked harmless. Together, they were dangerous. Incredibly dangerous. I remembered David's warning to never sign anything blindly. As I read, Michael watched me like a hawk, and Jennifer watched even closer, waiting, hoping, and expecting. I looked up. What exactly does this do? Jennifer answered instantly. It just makes life easier. I almost smiled. That wasn't a real explanation. It was a deflection. So I repeated the question. What does it do? Michael shifted uncomfortably. It lets us help if something happens. What kind of thing? Silence. Then Jennifer answered, if you can't manage things yourself. Interesting. Because until this very moment, no one had ever suggested I couldn't handle my own life. I paid my bills, scheduled my appointments, managed my money and investments. There was never an issue. Yet suddenly, they wanted control. Not to help, control. I nodded, looking thoughtful. Then I gave them the exact answer they dreaded. I'll need some time. Jennifer's face instantly fell. Time? I smiled pleasantly. Of course. I never sign legal papers without a careful review. Silence filled the room. Michael forced a laugh. Sure. But his eyes showed deep disappointment. That reaction alone confirmed my suspicions. If this were truly routine paperwork, waiting a few days wouldn't matter. Their desperation and urgency proved otherwise. Something was driving them. The second they stepped out of my room, I called David. He answered on the first ring. They finally approached me. What documents? I went through everything, page by page. David listened in silence, then sighed heavily. They aren't illegal. I figured, I replied. But they're dangerous. I figured that too. David's voice grew firm. Cindy, do not sign anything. I won't, I promised. The certainty in his voice brought me comfort. At least someone was on my side. The following days felt incredibly tense. Michael brought up the documents several times, always playing it cool and casual. Any thoughts on those? Still reviewing, I told myself. No rush. Yet, they always seemed to be in one. Jennifer was worse. Her patience was drying up. Every word felt forced, and every smile looked entirely rehearsed. For the first time, I noticed something else. Not anger, fear, especially when they thought they were alone. One night, I caught Michael sitting alone in the dark backyard, his head buried deep in his hands. Bills covered the outdoor table. Seeing me approach, he snatched them up, way too fast, like a teenager hiding something. I pretended not to notice, but I had already seen enough. That stack was incredibly thick, and the panic on his face told me it was bad news. Later that night, another chance came along. I wasn't trying to snoop or find answers. The truth just kept falling into my lap. Around midnight, I woke up thirsty and headed downstairs, hearing hushed voices in the living room. Michael and Jennifer, arguing in low, tense whispers. She was saying, "This isn't working." Jennifer sounded panicked. "I know," Michael said. "No, you don't know. I said I know." After a heavy silence, Jennifer spoke again. "We are running out of time," she said. Time. That word again. The sheer desperation in her voice, and Michael sounding completely defeated. "I'll figure it out," he said. "How?" No answer. Jennifer laughed bitterly. "Exactly." Then she said something that made my heart stop. "If your mother won't sign, what are we supposed to do?" The room went quiet. My pulse raced. Not from her question, but because of Michael's reaction, or his complete lack of one. He didn't defend me. He didn't tell her she was wrong or object. He just stayed silent. It was the same cold silence from the dinner table. The kind of silence that feels like betrayal. A moment later, Jennifer spoke again, her voice cracking under the weight. "What happens when they start calling again? Debt collectors, banks, lenders." I didn't know details, but everything pointed to the same dark truth. Things were so much worse than I ever imagined. Cruelly worse. I crept back to my room before they could catch me. I sat on my bed for an hour putting the puzzle pieces together. The house, the endless forms, the lies, the strange visitors, and those whispered phone calls. The constant fighting, the raw fear. It finally made sense. My son and his wife weren't just falling behind. They were drowning. And somewhere along the line, they decided my house was going to be their life raft. The real tragedy was their lack of honesty. They never asked me for help. They never told me the truth. They chose lies, manipulation, and relentless pressure. That hurt worse than any financial loss, because money can be recovered. Broken trust cannot. The very next morning, I called David. He listened quietly, staying silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, it chilled me to the bone. "Cindy, we have to find out exactly how much trouble they are in." I stared out my window at the yard and the home I had spent decades protecting. And for the first time, I feared the reality might be worse than my nightmares. The next morning, I met David for breakfast at a quiet spot away from his office. Just a sleepy diner on the edge of town. A place where folks gathered for coffee and kept their noses out of other people's business. I got there early, but David was already waiting. An untouched cup of black coffee sat right in front of him. That instantly worried me. David loved his coffee. If he wasn't touching it, Something was deeply wrong. As I slid into the booth, he looked up and said, "You won't like what I found." My stomach instantly knotted. "How bad is it?" I asked. David sighed deeply. "Worse than I feared." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he opened a folder. It was thick, much thicker than the last one. Just looking at it made my chest tighten. "What is that?" I whispered. "A complete picture of your son's debts," he replied. Suddenly, I was terrified to look, but I had to know. So I nodded. David laid it all out. My son's money troubles hadn't started recently. They had been growing for years, quietly, out of sight. A bad decision here, some overspending there. Nothing fatal on its own, but together, ruinous. The first real crisis hit about 4 years ago. Michael had gotten into real estate, not buying houses to rent, but high-risk speculating. He chased online gurus, listening to people promising fast and easy riches, the kind who always look successful online, but never share their failures. He sank a massive amount of cash into it, and initially, it looked promising. Then the market crashed. His projects collapsed, and most of his money vanished. I squeezed my eyes shut. That was so like him. He always hid his failures, hating to look weak, even as a kid and especially now. David kept going. To survive, Michael turned to credit cards, bank loans, and lines of credit. At first, it was manageable. Then it wasn't. The numbers just kept growing. The payments grew heavier. The pressure built. I stared at the papers page after page. Debt, debt, debt. Just endless debt. How had I missed all of this? Then it hit me. Michael never told me, and I trusted him. Trust can blind you. David flipped another page. This was the turning point. I looked down at a failed business proposal. Massive losses. My stomach dropped. When David told me the amount, I nearly stopped breathing. It was far larger than I expected. Far bigger than anything Michael could ever hope to repay quickly. "No." David nodded. "I'm afraid so." For a long moment, I just stared at the document. Not because of the money, but because of the silence. Years of carrying this heavy burden alone. Years of pretending everything was fine. Then another painful truth hit me. Jennifer knew. Of course she knew. The fights, the panic, the frantic calls, the desperation. It didn't happen overnight. She'd been living this nightmare for years. It didn't excuse what she did, but it explained it. David seemed to read my mind. "She's involved." I nodded slowly. I figured she signed for some of those loans. I wasn't surprised. "What else?" David hesitated, then handed me another document. This one hurt far more than the rest. Much more. Because this wasn't about money. It was deeply personal. I stared at the page. "What is this?" David sighed. "Notes from conversations?" My eyes narrowed. "What conversations?" "The ones Michael had with lenders." I frowned, then noticed something. My own name, repeated over and over. I looked closer, and my heart sank. Michael had been reassuring people, talking about future financial options and potential resources. One of those resources was me. Not directly, not illegally, but enough to paint a terrifying picture. He'd implied family assets existed, future inheritance, property, security, the house. It was always about the house. I felt sick. Not because he broke the law, but because he built plans around something that wasn't his, around me, my future, my death. The realization left me speechless. David waited quietly. Finally, I spoke. He was counting on the house. David nodded. Yeah. The word hit me like a hammer. Yes. Not maybe. Not possibly. Just yeah. Michael didn't want the house out of pure greed. At least, not entirely. He was just desperate. Desperate people convince themselves that terrible choices are reasonable, that manipulation is necessary, and that betrayal is totally justified. Understanding that didn't make it hurt any less. If anything, it hurt more, because now I could see the raw tragedy of it. My son wasn't some villain. He was just a frightened man, making worse and worse choices. We talked for nearly an hour. Each new detail exposed a deeper layer of the mess. Missed payments, mounting obligations, ruined credit, and pressure from every angle. Michael and Jennifer were drowning, and they saw my house as their only lifeboat. Eventually, David closed the folder. What are you thinking? I stared out the diner window. A young mother was helping her toddler walk across the parking lot. The little boy kept stumbling. She caught him every single time. No frustration, no complaints, just pure love. I felt tears sting my eyes. Do you know what hurts most? David stayed quiet, waiting. It's not even the debt. He nodded. I kept going. It isn't even the lies. A warm tear slipped down my cheek. It's that he never trusted me enough to tell the truth. If only he had come to me honestly. If he had just sat down and said, Mom, I made mistakes. Mom, I'm in trouble. Mom, I need help. Everything would be different. Maybe not easy, but different. Instead, he chose to lie. And lies leave wounds money can never heal. David leaned forward. Cindy, there's something else. I looked up. Another surprise. Terrific. What now? His face grew incredibly serious. I think they're preparing to do something. My stomach tightened again. What kind of something? The pressure is building. I waited. David folded his hands. People in this much financial trouble eventually run out of options. The words felt terrifyingly ominous. What are you saying? I'm saying they might start getting much more aggressive. I thought about the paperwork, their sudden sweetness, the rehearsed scripts, the desperation in Jennifer's voice, the late-night fighting. Suddenly, I understood. The signature. They needed my signature. But that wasn't Plan A. That was Plan B, which meant there had been a Plan A before it. And if my signature failed, they'd have a Plan C. The thought sent chills down my spine. Driving home later that afternoon, I couldn't stop thinking about Michael. Not the man he'd become, but the boy he used to be. The 16-year-old who wrote me that sweet note after his dad died. The boy who promised to take care of me. The boy who cried at his graduation. The boy who held me tight when I bought my house. Where did he go? Or maybe the more painful question is, did he disappear? Or did I just refuse to see who he was becoming? Pulling into the driveway, I felt the heavy tension immediately. My home felt different, heavy and uneasy, as if everyone inside was holding their breath. Jennifer paced the kitchen while Michael sat at the table, eyes glued to his phone. Neither noticed me walk in. Then Jennifer looked up. For a split second, Sheer terror crossed her face. Real fear. The kind of panic when time is running out. Suddenly, I knew whatever they were facing had become desperate, very urgent. It was no longer a question of whether they would push me. It was when. And deep down, I knew that answer was coming. Very soon. 3 days after my breakfast with David, Michael announced a family gathering. The moment he said those words, I knew exactly what was happening. It wasn't the family dinner. It was a performance, a carefully staged play where I was supposed to play the role of the villain. The news came at dinner. Jennifer brought it up casually while serving the food. She said she thought it would be nice if we all got together. Everyone. That meant relatives, distant cousins, and people I hadn't seen in decades. Michael just smiled and said it had been too long. I smiled back and agreed. But inside, I felt sick. Desperate people never put on a show without a motive. And Michael was desperate. Saturday came, and my house filled quickly. Cars lined the curb. Loud voices echoed down the hall. Fake laughter filled the kitchen. To an outsider, we looked like a happy family. But I noticed the cracks. Michael's hands shook. Jennifer wouldn't stop checking her phone. And every conversation slowly drifted toward money, duty, and family obligations. It was as if the whole afternoon was carefully scripted to paint a certain picture. Linda saw it too. She arrived just after noon and sat right next to me. Something feels off, she whispered. I nodded. It does, I replied. She scanned the crowd. What are they planning? I think we're about to find out. The truth came an hour later. Everyone crowded into the living room with coffee and cake, murmuring quietly. Then Michael stood up, and the room went dead silent. Far too quiet. My stomach nodded. Here we go. He cleared his throat and announced he wanted to speak. Several relatives nodded, and Jennifer offered a supportive smile. The show had started. He began preaching about family unity, duty, and how incredibly hard life had gotten lately. At first, he sounded harmless, even reasonable. Then the tone shifted. Slowly and deliberately, he started laying out his financial struggles, the cost of raising kids, and the heavy burden of supporting multiple generations. Heads nodded around the room in sympathy. Why wouldn't they? None of them knew the actual truth. Then he took his first shot. It is not always easy carrying everyone, he sighed. The silence deepened. I saw Stephen Brooks nodding. Stephen always worshipped Michael blindly. What do you mean? Someone in the back asked. He gave a heavy, dramatic sigh. Just life. More pity. Then Jennifer chimed in. We have been doing our best. This whole rehearsed routine was painfully obvious to me now, but not to the crowd. Stephen spoke up. You are a good son, Michael. And there it was. Validation. Exactly what he was fishing for. The trap tightened with every rehearsed comment. Michael worked so hard. Michael sacrificed everything. He supported his family and carried every heavy load. Right on cue, someone asked the question they wanted. That must be so hard. Michael gave a soft laugh. You do what you must. Then he looked right at me. Just a fleeting glance, but everyone caught it. Suddenly, they all bought into the sad story he was selling. Next to me, I felt Linda go completely rigid. She saw right through it. He kept going, saying, you cannot turn your back on family. How noble and selfless he sounded. Too bad it was a lie, at least the way he meant it. Jennifer placed a comforting hand on his arm, whispering how proud she was. More relatives nodded. Someone actually smiled at me, as if I should thank him. The sheer irony was sickening. Then, Stephen opened his mouth again. Not many sons would take care of their mother like you do. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowded room. I sat in absolute silence. My heart rate stayed perfectly steady, far calmer than expected. Something inside me had finally shifted. A few months back, this would have broken me. Now, I just felt empty, watching my own son lie right to their faces. Hurt to watch them believe him. Hurt seeing desperation turn into pure deceit. Finally, Stephen looked straight at me. You must be so grateful for everything Michael does, huh? The room fell completely quiet, waiting for my reaction. I forced a polite smile. I appreciate a lot of things. And I did. I appreciated Emily, Linda, and David. What I did not appreciate was manipulation. Stephen looked unsatisfied. Michael is a good man. I nodded. He can be. A few guests exchanged uneasy looks. You could feel the tension building. Jennifer immediately cut in. Michael carries so much weight on his shoulders. The same old act, the devoted son, the helpless mother, the hero. I listened in silence. Then, unexpectedly, Emily spoke up. My 12-year-old granddaughter, quiet all afternoon, suddenly stood straight up. That is not true. The entire room froze. Jennifer's face instantly hardened. Emily, no. But Emily looked devastated, completely crushed. Grandma helps everyone. Quiet fell. Kids have this incredible bravery, especially when grown-ups are busy guarding lies. Jennifer faked a smile. Honey, no. Emily's voice trembled. But she does. The room became painfully awkward. Michael looked humiliated. Jennifer was furious, and my heart just broke for my sweet granddaughter. She was caught right in the crossfire of a battle she never chose. Finally, Michael changed the subject. They kept talking, but the mood was ruined. Completely. Everyone knew something was off, even if they could not explain what. An hour later, things started winding down. People grabbed their coats, murmured their goodbyes, and headed out. Stephen pulled me aside, looking at me with pure pity. Cindy, you really should be thankful. I just stared at him. Thankful for Michael. His words cut deep, though he didn't mean them to. He actually believed it. He wasn't being malicious, he just didn't know. Nobody did. Not yet. So I just smiled. Then I said something that shocked even me. Stephen, how much do you actually know about this house? His eyebrows shot up. The house? Yes, he chuckled. What do you mean? I just smiled. Never mind. But I could see his confusion. For the first time all day, I saw real doubt in his eyes. By 6, everyone was gone. The house went quiet and peaceful again, on the surface anyway. As I cleared the table, Jennifer stayed silent. Michael wouldn't look at me, but Emily clung to my side. It was like she knew a storm was coming. Maybe she did. Once the house was empty, I slowly made my way upstairs to my bedroom. I opened my closet door. There lay the small metal lockbox, untouched for so many years. Carefully, I pulled it out, set it on the mattress, and unlocked it. Inside were the deeds, the purchase records, The proof, the entire payment history, every single shred of truth. For years, I kept these papers hidden because I trusted my own family. I left them hidden because I never actually imagined I would need them. But everything had changed. Michael had crossed a line, not a legal one, but an emotional one. He rewrote our history, and I was done letting him. As I slid the papers into a folder, my phone started ringing. It was David, and I picked up right away. "Cindy," he sounded breathless. "What happened? I found something." My stomach nodded. "What is it?" There was a heavy pause. Then David spoke. "Things are worse than we thought." I squeezed the phone tight. How much worse? His reply chilled me to the bone. "Cindy, I think Jennifer has known the truth for years." Just like that, my entire world flipped upside down. I didn't sleep a single wink that night. Once David said he believed Jennifer knew everything all along, my thoughts kept racing. I just sat there alone in the dark, long past midnight. The open folder lay right there on the mattress. The deed, the receipts, the bank transfers, the entire paper trail, every scrap of proof. For years, I had kept these papers buried because I trusted the people I loved. Now they didn't feel like records anymore. They felt like armor. Around 2 a.m, I stopped questioning if David was right. Deep down, I already knew the truth. Too many puzzle pieces were finally falling into place. Jennifer's smugness, her constant remarks about the property, her assuming it would go to her and Michael, the guilt trips, the paperwork. You don't act like that unless you think you've already won. Somehow, she had figured it out. The only real question left was exactly how much she actually knew. Saturday morning came, cold and gray, mimicking my mood. At exactly 9 o'clock, David pulled up. He walked in carrying his leather briefcase, the same one he'd had for years. Only this time, it felt heavy. It didn't just contain documents today. It held the truth. And that truth was finally going to set us free. My family's gathering from last weekend left a heavy tension that just wouldn't fade. By noon, Michael looked completely drained. Jennifer looked anxious. Emily was confused. No one was pretending anymore. Finally, around 3 o'clock, I asked everyone to sit in the living room. My voice was calm, surprisingly steady. Michael frowned. "What is going on?" I just smiled gently. "We need to talk." Jennifer got defensive instantly. "About what?" I stared directly at her. "The house." For a second, the color drained from her face. I saw it, and so did David. Michael looked lost. "What about it?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I opened the folder. The entire room went silent, total silence. Then I pulled out the first document, the original deed. I slid it onto the coffee table. Michael glanced at it, then scowled. "What is this?" "The deed." He looked annoyed. "Okay." I nodded. "Read it." For a moment, he didn't move. Then he reached out and picked it up. His eyes scanned the page. Within seconds, his confusion turned to shock, then utter disbelief. "What is this?" I simply repeated myself. "The deed." Michael looked again, reading much closer this time. His hands began to shake because there it was, in black and white. My name, Cindy Simmons, owner. Not Michael, not Jennifer. Cindy Simmons. The room felt completely frozen. Jennifer stared at the floor. David stayed quiet. Emily looked back and forth between us, completely lost. Finally, Michael stammered, "This doesn't mean—" David cut in for the first time. "Actually, it means exactly what it says." Silence fell over us again. Michael looked at him, then at me, then back to the paper. "No," he whispered weakly. His voice was so small, almost childlike. I reached back into the folder. One by one, I laid the papers on the table. Purchase agreements, wire transfers, bank records, checks. Years of undeniable evidence. The truth didn't need any emotion. It already had the paperwork. "Mom," he croaked, his voice barely working. "Mom, what is all this?" I looked straight at him. "This is the house." He just stared at me. I kept going. "This is the money I spent." Another paper. "This is the insurance payout from your father's death." Another. "This is my savings." Another. "The investment account I emptied." Another. "This is every single sacrifice you never knew I made." No one spoke, not even Jennifer. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely terrified. Then Stephen Brooks, who had dropped by unexpectedly that afternoon, spoke up from across the room. "Wait." His eyes went wide. "You bought this house?" I simply nodded. "Yes." Stephen looked stunned, but Michael said, I know what Michael said. The room went painfully quiet. Everyone there suddenly realized they had only heard half the story, and that half was wrong. Completely wrong. Michael looked completely overwhelmed, shaking his head. "No, you just helped." David leaned forward, his voice firm. "No, she bought this place entirely." Michael just stared. David kept going. Every single payment, another document. Every legal filing, another. Every ownership record, another. The house belonged to me from the start. The silence that followed felt endless. Then something unexpected happened. Jennifer started to cry. Not dramatically, but quiet tears. The kind shed when your world collapses around you. Michael stared at her, completely confused. "What?" Jennifer just covered her face. For a few seconds, she couldn't even speak. Finally, she whispered, "I knew." The room erupted. "What?" Michael practically screamed. Jennifer looked utterly broken. I knew. No one moved. No one breathed. Even David looked shocked. Michael stared at his wife. "What do you mean you knew?" Jennifer looked down as years of hidden secrets finally spilled out of her at once. "When we moved in, she whimpered, her voice trembling. I saw some of the paperwork. The room stayed frozen." Michael looked like he'd been hit. "You knew?" She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I wasn't entirely sure at first." Another silence. But later I found out. My heart sank. Not because she knew, but because she never told him. Not out of kindness or integrity. She had simply used that information quietly for years. Michael looked absolutely devastated. "You let me believe." Jennifer began sobbing even harder. "I didn't know how to tell you," she cried. That was likely true, but it wasn't the whole truth. The reality was far uglier. She stayed quiet because the lie benefited her, and now everyone could see it. Every relative, every friend, every witness. Our family story had shattered completely. Stephen sat there speechless. The same man who had praised Michael just a week ago now looked horrified. Eventually, he turned to face me. "Cindy," he said, his voice cracking. "I'm sorry." I gave a sad smile. "You didn't know?" "No," he shook his head. "I didn't. Neither did anyone else, because no one had heard my side. For years, I stayed silent, and silence just lets others write your story for you." Michael finally looked at me, really looked at me, not as an obstacle or a burden, but finally as his mother. For the first time in months, I saw shame, real shame, the kind that claws deep into your soul. His eyes welled with tears. I had no idea. I believed him. That was the real tragedy. I genuinely trusted him. Michael had been selfish, entitled, weak. But right then I realized something. Jennifer had been pulling his strings too. Not completely, but enough. His choices were still his own, but she helped spin the lie. Together, they convinced themselves the house was already theirs. The truth finally shattered that fantasy. The room fell dead silent for a long, heavy moment. Then I shut the folder. The paperwork had spoken. The truth was out, and only one choice remained. A decision that would rewrite all our lives forever. Once the truth was out, nobody knew what to say. The silence in that living room felt heavier than any screaming match. For years, they believed one version of the story. Now, they faced another. The two realities could not coexist. One of them had to die. Those papers had already answered that. Michael sat completely frozen. Jennifer stared blankly at the floor. Emily looked lost and scared. David just stayed quiet. As for me, I felt oddly peaceful. Not happy, not triumphant, just calm. The crushing weight of my silence was finally gone. For years, I let them define who I was. The helpless mother, the burden, the woman living off charity. Now, the cold, hard truth stood in the center of the room. No explanation needed, no defense required, just raw facts. Finally, Stephen cleared his throat. "Cindy," I looked at him. "I owe you an apology." I smiled gently. "You don't owe me anything." "Yes, I do." His voice trembled. "I judged you. I stayed silent because he was right. Everyone had judged me. Not out of malice, just carelessness. The way people do when they only hear one side." Stephen glanced at Michael, then turned back to me. I should have asked questions. Around us, a few others nodded. Suddenly, the room was full of people questioning everything they thought they knew. Then Michael finally spoke. His voice was a cracked whisper. "Mom." I looked at him. He seemed so small now. Not physically, but emotionally. The pride that fueled his anger for months had evaporated. Only shame was left. "Why did you not tell me?" The question stunned everyone, even me. Of all the things he could have asked, that was his choice? "Why did you not tell me?" I let the question hang for a few seconds. Then I answered honestly. "Because I never wanted you to feel indebted to me." The room stayed silent. I continued. "When your father died, I promised myself something." A tear slipped down my cheek. "I promised I would help you build a life." Michael lowered his head. "I was not trying to buy your gratitude or create a debt. I was only trying to give you your freedom." For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Michael began to weep. Not quietly, not politely. It was the kind of sobbing that hits when years of denial finally cave in. I had not seen him cry like that since Robert's funeral. The sight absolutely broke my heart. Because despite all of this, he was still my son. Still the little boy I carried, the teenager I protected, the young man whose future mattered more to me than my very own. Jennifer suddenly stood up. Every eye turned to her. She looked completely shattered. "I need to say something," she whispered. Nobody interrupted. Nobody moved. Jennifer wiped her wet eyes and looked straight at me. I was wrong. The words were slow and painful, but they came. I was wrong about so many things. I stayed silent. She went on. "When I first found out about the house, I was shocked." Her voice shook. I could not understand why Michael did not know. The room remained dead silent. At first, I wanted to tell him. Michael looked up sharply, but Jennifer lowered her eyes, struggling before she finally went on. Then life got complicated. Complicated. Such a harmless word for something so incredibly destructive. The debt started growing. Then the crushing pressure started. Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks as she whispered, "I convinced myself the house would solve all our problems." Nobody spoke. We all knew she was telling the truth. The desperation, the manipulation, the pressure, it was all there. It all clicked now. Not excusable, but understandable. And sometimes understanding hurts far more than anger. Michael stared at his wife. "You let me believe I was supporting my mom." Jennifer gave a weak nod. "I know. You let me believe the house was ours." More tears fell. "I know." The sheer devastation on Michael's face was almost too painful to watch, because for the very first time, he was not just facing what he had done, he was facing how badly he had been betrayed, and how willingly he had lied to himself. Silence hung over the room for several minutes. Finally, David spoke up. "Cindy." I looked over at him. "What do you want to do?" Every single eye turned to me. The one question everyone avoided, the only one that mattered. What happens now? What happens when trust shatters? When family wounds each other? What happens when the truth finally comes to light? I looked around the room at Michael, Jennifer, and Emily. Then I took a deep breath. I have been thinking about that. Michael instantly looked terrified, genuinely terrified. For the first time, I realized he expected me to throw them out. That fear had probably haunted him since the papers surfaced, and honestly, part of me had considered it. Not for revenge, but to protect myself, because hurt people eventually hit their limit. But then I looked at Emily. Sweet Emily, the only one who defended me when nobody else would. The only one who consistently showed me kindness. And suddenly, the answer was clear. I am not selling this house. Relief washed over Emily, and then over me, because I knew it was the right decision. I kept going. And I am not throwing anyone out. Michael broke down crying again. Jennifer covered her mouth, but I was not done. Instantly, the room grew tense again. There will be changes. David gave a quiet nod, as if expecting it. I looked straight at Michael. For now, the ownership stays exactly where it has always been. He nodded quickly. Of course. Then I turned to Jennifer. And there will be complete financial transparency. Neither argued, neither complained. They had no leg to stand on anymore. The truth stripped that away. Finally, I looked at them both. "I will help you fix this," I said. Their eyes widened. "But not by losing this house." David looked instantly relieved. He had obviously been terrified of that very outcome. I continued. "We will face these debts honestly." I paused. "We will stop hiding. We will stop lying. And then we will start acting like a family again." No one spoke. Some truths do not need an answer, only acceptance. A few minutes later, everyone finally left. Quietly, thoughtfully. The entire atmosphere had completely shifted. We were not healed, just changed. Healing takes time, but truth opens the door. As evening fell, I sat alone on the back porch, the very same porch where I had spent endless afternoons wondering how everything went so wrong. Moments later, Emily joined me. She sat beside me in silence, just like her grandfather used to. Eventually, she slipped her small hand into mine. "Grandma?" "Yes, honey." "Are we going to be okay?" I stared at the sunset, then back at the house. My house. Our home. A place that caused so much pain, yet somehow still held a promise of healing. I gently squeezed her hand. "Yes, we are." She smiled, and for once, I actually believed it. But one last talk still had to happen. A quiet talk between a mother and her son, decades in the making. And before this night was over, Michael would finally confess the truth he had been hiding from everyone, even himself. The house felt completely different after the truth came out. Not better, not worse, just different. For months, a heavy tension had filled every room. Every chat felt like a negotiation. Every dinner felt like a test. Now, the lies were gone. And while the truth hurt us all, it also cleared a toxic fog from the air. For the first time in forever, nobody was pretending anymore. The weeks after were uncomfortable. Healing always is. People imagine reconciliation as some dramatic moment, a tearful apology, a warm embrace, a single conversation that magically fixes everything. Real life does not work that way. True healing is slower, messier, and more complicated. It happens one choice at a time, one honest talk at a time, one tough day at a time. The first real breakthrough came when Michael finally agreed to show me everything. Every debt, every loan, every missed payment. No secrets, no excuses, just the hard facts. We sat at the kitchen table for almost 4 hours. Michael looked exhausted, not physically, but deep in his soul. Years of keeping secrets had finally crushed him. At one point, he slid a stack of papers toward me. I do not even know where to start. For a moment, I saw the 16-year-old boy who had lost his father. The boy who was so terrified of the future. The boy who just needed someone to guide him. Not the angry man who blamed me for everything. Just my son. Broken, ashamed, human. I looked at the documents, then at him. "Start with the truth," I said. His eyes welled up, and finally, he did. The stories slowly spilled out. Bad investments, poor decisions, chasing losses with even bigger risks, all born from embarrassment, pride, and fear. The deeper we dug, the clearer the picture became. Most of his struggles were not really financial. The debt was just a symptom. The real problem was was deep shame. He could not bear admitting failure, especially to me, after all I had sacrificed. The irony was absolutely heartbreaking. My own love, which should have made him feel safe, had somehow made him terrified of disappointing me. He was too proud to look weak, too scared to ask for help. So he chose secrecy. Secrecy became lies. Lies became desperation. And that desperation almost shattered our family. Jennifer joined us later that afternoon, looking incredibly anxious. Unlike Michael, she did not cry. She was not the crying type. Instead, she just looked completely exhausted, like someone who had spent years carrying heavy anxiety and finally collapsed under it. For a long time, nobody said a word. Then she surprised me. "Cindy," I looked up. "I am sorry." Simple words, no excuses, no explanations, just a raw apology. For a few seconds, I was speechless. Despite everything, I could see she truly meant it. Finally, with genuine feeling, I nodded. "Thank you." Her eyes welled up. That was enough. Not forgiveness, not yet. Just a fragile beginning. The following weeks brought major changes. David helped reorganize their tangled finances, consolidating several of their debts. Others were negotiated, and some assets were sold. It was a painful process, but an honest one. And honesty has a beautiful way of creating hope, even when times are still incredibly tough. One afternoon, David pulled me aside. "You know what surprises me most?" "What?" "They are actually making progress." I smiled. "Really?" He nodded. "For once, they are finally facing reality." Reality. Such a simple word, yet such a powerful concept. You cannot solve problems you refuse to acknowledge. And Michael was finally doing just that. That meant everything to me. Still, I knew something else had to change. Not just for my son, but for myself. For decades, my life had completely revolved around other people. First Robert, then Michael, and finally Emily. I had spent so many years looking after everyone else that I had completely forgotten how to care for myself. Linda reminded me of that in her usual way. One Thursday morning, she practically dragged me to lunch. No invitation, just dragged. "Cindy." "What?" "You need a life." I laughed. "I do have a life." "No." She pointed her fork right at me. "You have obligations." I laughed harder, but she was not amused. "I am serious," she insisted. The more we talked, the more I knew she was right. For years, I had been waiting for retirement, waiting for the perfect moment, waiting to finally live. Suddenly, I was 68 years old. How much longer was I going to wait? The very next month, I joined the local community center, a book club, and a gardening group. To my absolute surprise, I loved every minute of it. I made actual friends, people who knew me simply as Cindy, not Mom, not Grandma, not some caretaker, just me. It felt incredible, strange, but wonderful. Meanwhile, things at home slowly kept getting better, though not perfectly. There were setbacks, awkward moments, and old habits. But progress was definitely happening. The greatest surprise came from Michael. One evening, he knocked on my bedroom door, a simple gesture that immediately took me back to his childhood. "Come in." He stepped inside slowly, looking anxious once more. He had been acting nervous around me a lot lately. I was not sure if that meant progress or not. "Can we talk?" "Of course." He sat down in the armchair right by the window, the very same chair where I had spent endless, tearful nights after Robert died. For a few long moments, he remained silent. Then finally he whispered, "I do not think I have ever really known who you are." It caught me completely off guard. "What do you mean?" He stared at the floor. "I have always just known you as Mom." I stayed quiet. He continued, "The person who fixes everything." Another long pause. "The person who sacrifices." Another pause. "The person who is always there." Then his voice cracked. "But I never actually stopped to consider your own life." The bedroom fell completely silent. Not an uncomfortable silence, a thoughtful one. "I know." He looked up. The heavy sadness in his eyes felt entirely real. "I should have," he murmured. I nodded. "Yes." A tear slowly rolled down his cheek. "I do not deserve your endless patience." "No." My blunt answer visibly startled him. Honestly, it surprised me as well. "No," I shook my head. "No, you do not." That truth hung in the air, raw, heavy, but necessary. Then I reached out and took his trembling hand. "But growth is not about deserving." His eyes widened a bit. "It is about choosing." I gently squeezed his hand. "You can choose to be a better man." For a long moment we sat in silence. Then he nodded slowly, and this time I believed him. Not because of tears or empty promises, but because his actions finally started to match his words. As summer drew near, life felt calmer, lighter, and more peaceful. Then, one evening, months after the hard truth had finally surfaced, Michael knocked on my bedroom door again. Only this time, he looked entirely different, determined, resolute, as if he had finally made up his mind. I knew it the second I looked at him. This was it. The final, heavy talk we had both spent months avoiding. A talk that had nothing to do with debt, houses, or paperwork. It was about us, a mother and her son, the deep scars we carried, and whether our love could actually survive them. It happened on a quiet Sunday evening, the kind my late husband Robert used to love. As the sun set, the neighborhood fell peaceful. For the first time in years, the heavy tension in our home vanished. No yelling, no secrets, no lies, just absolute silence. A completely honest silence. Then Michael knocked on my door. "Mom? Come in," I said. He stepped inside quietly and shut the door. For a long moment, we just stood there in silence. We just looked at each other, a mother and her son, bound by a lifetime of love, but deeply wounded by one terrible season of mistakes. Finally, Michael sat down. "I think I owe you the truth," he said. I gave him a sad smile and agreed. He stared out the window, then back at me. For the next hour, he spilled everything. Not about the heavy debts. I knew about that. Not about Jennifer. I already knew plenty about her, too. What my son confessed was much deeper and infinitely more painful. He spoke of his shame, his failures, and the paralyzing fears he had buried for years. Do you know what the worst part was? His voice was exhausted. "What?" He let out a soft, broken laugh. Every time I looked at you, I frowned. What do you mean? I asked. He cast his eyes down. You always seemed stronger than me. It broke my heart because I never felt strong. But he kept going. Dad died. You survived. You worked 2 jobs. You built a life. You bought a house. You never quit, his voice cracked. And every time I failed at something, I felt smaller. Tears welled in his eyes. For a long moment we sat in silence. Then he whispered, I was ashamed. The raw honesty of his words hit me harder than anything. They did not excuse his behavior, but they finally explained it. So much of human cruelty stems from hidden shame. People who feel tiny inside often try to make others look even smaller. Those who feel powerless crave control, and people who fear failure will always blame others. Somewhere along the line, my son had done exactly that. Not out of hatred for me, but because he hated what he saw in himself. Michael wiped his eyes. I spent years pretending everything was fine. I nodded. I know, I said. The debt piled up. I got scared. And then I got desperate. Yeah, I murmured as he looked away. I started believing my own lies. That sentence cut deep because it was so undeniably true. Michael had not just lied to everyone else. He had lied to himself for years, until fiction finally felt like reality, until resentment felt justified, until gratitude died, and he convinced himself I was the burden. A burden in the very house I had bought. The bitter irony would have been funny if it wasn't so tragic. I reached out and took his hand. The hand I held when he learned to walk, and at Robert's funeral. The same hand I had nearly lost to emotional distance over the past year. Michael, I said. He looked up. Yes, you hurt me. Fresh tears spilled immediately. I know, he whispered. No. I squeezed his hand gently. I don't think you really do. He stared at me as I finally allowed myself to speak the absolute truth. There were nights I cried myself to sleep. His face completely collapsed. There were mornings I wondered where my sweet boy had gone as more tears fell. There were moments when I genuinely believed I had failed as a mother. He shook his head violently. No. Yes. My voice remained calm because healing requires raw honesty, even the painful kind. I questioned everything. The room fell perfectly silent. Michael cried openly now, not from guilt, but from pure grief. He grieved for the damage he caused, for the lost years he could never reclaim, and for the trust he had shattered. Eventually, he whispered that he was sorry. 3 simple words, but this time they felt real, not rehearsed, defensive, or convenient. I believed him. And strangely, that was enough. Not enough to wipe away our painful past. Nothing can ever do that. But enough to build a new future. After a long silence, Michael spoke up. There is something else. I raised an eyebrow, asking what. He smiled weakly. For months, I have been trying to make things right. I laughed softly. Good luck with that. To my absolute surprise, he started laughing too. It was the first genuine laugh we shared in ages. Then he reached into his pocket and handed me a folded sheet of paper. What is this? I asked. Open it. I unfolded the paper, not understanding what I was looking at first. Then the truth hit me. It was a detailed plan to pay back every cent. Budgets, savings goals, debt reduction milestones, projected timelines, housing plans, and future financial targets. I looked up, confused. Michael smiled. "We are moving." "What? Not tomorrow?" He laughed. "Not next month," he smiled. "But eventually." I stared at him. "You do not have to." "I know," he answered immediately. And that mattered because for once, he was not speaking from entitlement. He was speaking from responsibility. We need to build our own future. I felt tears forming, he continued, not live inside yours. For several seconds, I could not speak because those words meant so much more than money. Growth, real growth, the kind that changes you, that only comes after pain. A few months later, our plan was already working. The debts were shrinking. Michael's finances were improving. Jennifer had found additional work. Our household atmosphere had completely transformed. Most importantly, honesty had become normal. Not exceptional, just normal. Then, nearly a year after everything began, another surprise arrived. Emily's 8th grade graduation. The ceremony itself was lovely, but that was not the surprise. The real shock came afterward, when Emily stood at the podium and completely surprised everyone, including me. She held a prepared speech, then looked directly toward our family and smiled. My grandmother taught me something important. My eyes widened. The audience grew quiet. Emily continued. She taught me that generosity is not weakness. She paused. She taught me that forgiveness is not surrender. Another pause. And she taught me that family is not about who owns a house. The audience chuckled softly. Then Emily smiled. It is about who makes it a home. By then, I was crying, and so was Michael. So was Jennifer. Even David looked emotional. When the ceremony ended, Emily ran straight toward me. I pulled her into my arms and held her tightly, because suddenly I understood something. The house had never been the real story. No, not really. The house was only the stage. The real story was family. A broken family, a healing family, imperfect, the kind most of us have, the kind worth fighting for. Later that evening, as I sat alone on the back porch watching the sunset, I thought about everything that had happened. The accusations, the betrayal, the lies, the pain, the truth, the forgiveness, and finally, the healing. A year earlier, my son had told me I was living off him while sleeping in the house I bought. Today, he was rebuilding his life. Today, he was becoming someone better. And today, for the first time in a long while, I felt something simple. Peace, real peace. The kind that arrives when truth finally wins. The kind that arrives when love survives. The kind that arrives when a family finds its way home. Sometimes, the deepest wounds do not come from strangers. They come from the people we love most. That is what makes family conflict so incredibly painful. We expect understanding from family. We expect loyalty. We expect gratitude. And when those things disappear, the heartbreak feels overwhelming. But this story is not really about a house. It is not about money, ownership, or debt. It is about truth. It is about what happens when pride replaces honesty and when assumptions replace communication. Many people carry burdens in silence. They hide their fears because they are ashamed. They hide their failures because they do not want to disappoint the people they love. Unfortunately, secrets rarely solve problems. Another lesson is that generosity should never require recognition. I gave because I loved. I sacrificed because I cared. Yet, even the most loving people must remember that healthy boundaries matter. Kindness should not require self-erasure. Perhaps the most important lesson is that forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is choosing not to let pain control the future. It is allowing people the opportunity to change while still honoring the truth of what happened. Families are imperfect. People make mistakes, sometimes very painful mistakes. But when honesty returns, healing finally becomes possible. If this story touched your heart, I would love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever been misunderstood by someone you loved? Would you have forgiven Michael? Share your own experience or opinion in the comments below. And if you enjoy emotional family stories about resilience, healing, and second chances, please like, subscribe, and join our community. Also, tell us where you are watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. Thank you for being here. And remember, sometimes the strongest families are not the ones that never break. They are the ones that find the courage to heal.